You're listening to Two Beers Until Phronesis, a philosophy podcast for students, graduates, and anyone else interested in ideas. Alongside regular guests and friends, we discuss some of life's big questions over a few beers. Enjoy. All right, guys, New Year's. You excited for it?
Yes. No. On the fence. Really.
Yeah. Just another day, isn't it?
Yeah, well, is it? That's the thing.
I mean, it is.
Yeah.
It's a
What else would it be?
it's a concept.
Is there some sort of undiscovered category of day that I haven't?
All right, you say it's another day. Do you guys do anything special for New Year's at all?
Well, no, I didn't. Last 2 years, I think I kind of dossed down at about 8 p.m. as well.
Do you think it's good that there's a sort of cultural thing where we sort of have a reflection on the year we've had? Because that's kind of what New Year's as a celebration kind of feels in a way. It's that we kind of look back at the year and go, hey, this happened this year, this happened this year, this happened this year. And maybe that sort of idea of having a sort of self-reflection moment, maybe that's a good thing.
I agree. I think it's like probably the only time of year you see people en masse taking stock of what the fuck they've done with their year. And it's kind of sad that we need that as a day. I feel like people should be quite proactive in doing that as their year goes along. But if that's what it takes to kind of unite people in having at least one day a year where you actually think, what have I done for the last 365
Even if
days?
people aren't sold on New Year's, you have no choice to you can't avoid it effectively.
Yeah, well, this is my thinking. So I'm not entirely sure if it is this like big existential moment where people are actually taking stock of their lives. I'd like to believe that, but part of me kind of cynically feels it's a little bit of a gimmick. The whole new year, new me stuff. I'm not entirely convinced that people are actually, and it kind of leads on to resolutions, because I don't think people are particularly effective at making resolutions. I think there was a study from Bristol University. Most resolutions end up getting broken, typically, according to pretty much all the research there is available out there.
Do you think it's important, though, to separate this, what I would say is, the very trivial part of it, which is like the fact that so many people suddenly realise, oh, I have an arbitrary new start of a day, and thus I'm going to do this thing that I know I should be doing anyway. But because it's an arbitrary new start of the date, that I'm going to really start to do it now. Even though, in fact, the problem is that you haven't actually produced a new framework in order to enforce this behaviour for yourself, which I think is the most important. If you're intending to start a new thing, let's say that's more regular exercise, going to the gym, what you need to do is have a plan for how am I going to enforce this for myself? How am I going to make this behaviour a thing that I'm actually going to do, rather than just like every other time sort of start it and then go, give up in a month or so, which New Year's resolution happened to be. It's like this is the problem, is we have this problem where we go, well, New Year's, that means there's an actual reason, there's a sort of thing that's going to incentivize me to stick to this resolution, but unfortunately there isn't actually any framework there.
Yeah, I think part of that is that there's very little sort of cultural framework around New Year's. It's a ritual that we all partake in, and it's this big cultural moment, but it's a little bit hollow. It's not quite enough.
But I would say the actual reflection part that I mentioned earlier, I would say that is actually kind of cultural in a way. It's just the idea of starting anew and actually enforcing new behaviours or being in a new place, or, tomorrow is the next day of the rest of your life. All that sort of thing is quite fallacious and a bit weird. But I think, especially if you look at the television during New Year's Eve, a lot of it is, what's happened this year? What's reflected in things? I think that's definitely a thing that seems to be a cultural part of it. But the idea of starting anew is very poorly thought out.
Yeah, well, I think it's a problem of specificity. There's not, how do we actually go about practically making sure that, we take on these new attitudes, and, if you want to start losing weight or you want to be a better person, it's like, it all just seems very vacuous a lot of the time. I mean, it has maybe worked for me one or two times in the past. Have you guys ever made a resolution? Are you making one this year?
I have.
Did it work?
Yeah, it did actually. My resolution last year was to be a lot more consistent with my training and my dieting, and it's worked. I've got in much better shape. So, and I agree with you completely. I think too many people, they're quick to virtue signal about what they're putting in place. They're quick to give in to the societal pressure of actually having a New Year's resolution. I think they're more concerned with putting on Facebook or whatever their social media of choice is. Look, this is what I'm going to do. And they treat it as if it's done and dusted then. And the proud moment for them is just having that New Year's resolution, when in reality, as you've pointed out rightly, they have no plan in place. They have no framework. They've made no changes to the type of person they are. They're the kind of person that hasn't done that for their whole life, assumingly.
Well, I don't want to be too cynical because, I mean, yeah, sure, it doesn't work if you're literally just doing this once a year. But it also is very hard to sort of contemplate and put into practice things like personal growth. That is quite a hard thing. It sounds easy, but maybe it doesn't sound easy, but it's very difficult to nail down the specifics of how to do that. So it's pretty much the only preparation I did for this. I watched an hour-long sort of seminar on how to use Stoicism.
An hour?
To help. Yeah, it was a whole hour.
Are you mental?
A whole hour of my life I'll never get back. No, it was pretty good. It was this lecture this guy gave on how to use Stoicism and those kinds of ways of thinking to sort of make sure you stick to your resolutions and make sure the kinds of resolutions you're making are beneficial. Because Stoicism is one of those easy philosophies you can just sort of, you don't have to have any pre-existing framework, I guess, underneath it. You can kind of just use it to make your life easier.
Although the weird thing is, if you're being stoic about your resolutions, in a way, what's the point in resolutions? Because if you're being stoic, you would generally be considering all these things, regardless of the arbitrary dateline. But to your point about people taking resolutions and then sort of talking about them, like you use the word virtue signaling, but when you actually tell people about things you're going to do, plans you have, interesting, what that actually does is you release a certain amount or a small amount of dopamine in telling people that you're going to do something, and what that actually does is it actually sort of cheats your reward mechanism into going, I've kind of done a bit of it. And you end up actually being less likely to complete the task because you've already had that sort of self-satiation of going, I'm going to do this. And often the best thing to do is just not tell anyone what you're going to do.
That was the first thing you said when I started playing mandolin. You're like, don't fucking tell me you're playing mandolin because you won't do it.
It's like, don't make a big deal out of it. Just do it. Like, you don't have to tell people, because the problem is you'll trick your brain into thinking you've done something because you're telling everyone you're doing it. But that doesn't mean you're doing it. That just means you're getting a little bit of that sort of reward feeling from telling people you're doing something instead of just doing it and getting on with it and then, seeing the results from that.
You've actually gone on to one of my two New Year's resolutions for this year. So I tend to be quite proactive in my resolutions. I like to think about them and not just rush into them. So one of them is to adhere to a morning routine that I've set out, and I've been quite comprehensive in how I've laid that out. And that's, I guess, by the by. But the main one that you've just touched on there is to kind of have this attitude of working silently and doing stuff without needing the gratification of others whilst I'm on my journey, and maybe posting my achievements when I've actually got there. And they're like, oh yeah, I've been doing all this for the last 50 days. I've just achieved this. Great. I'll share that with you. But apart from that, just keeping quiet, because I'm a sucker for getting involved in telling people I'm doing this and doing that and all the social media stuff. So that's something I really want to fix, because I don't particularly like that about myself. And I think it's quite an easy trap people fall into. So
do you feel you rely quite a lot on that sort of validation from other people with what you're doing, or
not as much as I used to when I was younger? Definitely not. I definitely I'm not as much of a person who likes to be seen doing something as opposed to actually doing it. It's like the people that when they go and give money to the homeless, like the most important part is that they were filmed. That's how they see it. It's the filming of it. It's the fucking, the picture of them and the homeless guy holding a £5 note between them and giving a thumbs up to the camera. Like that. I've never been quite that bad, but as I've gotten older, I've been slowly learning it. I think this year it's something I particularly want to focus on. So that's a really interesting point you just made. I didn't know all that about the dopamine and stuff. That's fucking cool.
I mean, Zach, what about your New Year's? Did you ever make any resolutions, or is that just...
No, I tend not to. Again, no, I do agree that it should be, a self-fulfilling pursuit. You shouldn't have to conform to any quota as such that your peers, you might feel pressured from others or from yourself to, set these, this checklist. But yeah, it should become something that's, rewarding internally, gives you, sense of achievement without having to, please everyone. So sometimes it doesn't have to be anything dramatic. It can just be kind of almost 5-10% incremental increases in performance output at a time. And you won't get any medals for that as such or any accolades, but you know that you're one step close to where you want to be. That's what I find.
Yeah, well, it's picking your battles as well, like finding things that you actually have control of. And this is the important part in like why something like Stoicism helps so much. I'll put a link to the seminar in the notes, but do you want to hear about it? Shall I just unpack some of that stuff?
Sure.
Okay. Well, first of all, Stoicism. You guys know what that is, yeah?
Shall we give a brief history?
Just like a rough definition.
For those who haven't heard it before, definitely not me.
Yeah, so I mean, Stoicism as a movement started in, say, I believe it was the 3rd century BC. This was sort of a thing that came out of Greek philosophy. This is sort of like, if you want to think about it, sort of late Plato time, I would say.
Yeah, so there are a bunch of philosophical schools, and Stoicism was one of the most enduring of all of those. You had other ones like the Epicureans and stuff, and different disciplines, ways of looking at the world, and they were probably more the equivalent of something like a monastery, because they would devote their whole lives to these things. So it's a kind of a holistic way of looking at everything you do and the way you're thinking and your approach to life completely. It's all to do with kind of what we can control and what we can't control. So we've done an episode on this before. Me and Sam talked about it, because Sam takes on a lot of Stoicism with some of his teaching and stuff, and his work and his personal life. But it's not like the Phantom Menace, where they're all just like stood being really boring and talking to each other.
You should say that the definition, the way we actually use Stoic in sort of our modern way of talking about it, is sort of emotionless. It means to be, synonym would be stolid. It means to not have any, but that isn't actually really the definition. That isn't Stoicism as a movement or what it sort of historically represented. That's just sort of what it ended up becoming sort of known as, is due to the fact that we have a word that's derived from the same place that has ended up meaning emotionless. But that's not what it's about. In fact, it's in many ways it's about achieving eudaimonia, as the Greeks called it, a sort of state of fulfillment or flourishing. Which is different from like grinning. You don't, like this absolute state of happiness. Like if that's what you think is happiness, it's more about fulfillment. Just because eudaimonia always gets translated as happiness, and it's like, well, it's not quite it. It's more like flourishing or fulfillment. Or and the example you use is, like shooting up with heroin, you're going to be very happy.
Yeah.
But it's very different to say that that's a meaningful thing or something to do with your flourishing.
So it's not just something that gives you kind of, contentedness. It has to be something.
Yeah, it's the pursuit of what's meaningful versus what makes you happy.
Yeah, because that would be more part of what, as people know, is the hedonistic sort of side of things. Whereas, like this word eudaimonia, I think really should come back into English, because it really is a very good word for what we normally have to use stuff like vitality or human flourishing instead.
I think fulfillment kind of does most of the legwork. It's difficult because I think it also relies on that kind of older context and stuff as well. But to do this, you partake in something called prohoresis, which is kind of like prioritizing thought, prioritizing what's important, in order to cultivate virtue. Aristotelianism is different to Stoicism, but some of the ideas do cross over. So much like Aristotle, they thought that we are what we habitually do. So habit breeds these kind of virtues that are desirable for eudaimonia, basically.
Yeah, essentially the virtues or the things that you think are good qualities about yourself, what you're enforcing as a part of your behavioural being in a regular way, that is what the Stoics would say. Well, that's the primary thing that's most important. So we need to be thinking about how we should be controlling ourselves in such a way that we can achieve proper fulfillment and like you said, be very sort of able to control one's innate persuasions.
So you can see how this would relate to something like making a resolution about to stop smoking. They'd say that it's all about controlling habits. Giving into a certain habit makes it harder the next time. They talked a lot about that. But there's also this really strange idea that we have, because most people who break their their resolutions. They'll break them on like January the 3rd and go, oh shit, that's me done.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's
Self-loathing
it's like
takes
gave it a
over,
go.
doesn't
as
it?
if it's like a streak. As if it's like, oh, I broke the streak, never mind, next year. But
Which shows they never really wanted it in the first place.
yeah, well, Stoicism would...
They had one foot in the door the whole time.
Yeah, exactly. And Stoicism would kind of say, it's a bit like, starting boxing or starting running or whatever. If you lose, that doesn't mean you have lost.
Yeah.
It's a process, and it's a constant reflective process.
Yeah, it's undertaking that journey, isn't it?
And it sort of ties into that idea that I was talking about. When you have new things that you want to achieve, it's not good enough to just write down the thing you want to achieve and go, I'm going to go for that. You have to develop an entire framework, an entire way in which you are going to manipulate yourself, your own being, your own personality, to be able to achieve that goal. You have to remember that you are piloting this fucking annoying thing that has all these weird, it has laziness, it has innate, desires. Sometimes we just want to give up or do something, and you have to be able to develop a framework not only to help that annoying thing you are piloting to achieve that goal, but also because you, as the rational thinking person who is coming up with this list, is not necessarily going to be the same as you when you have something bad happen in your life and you're depressed and you're not thinking the same way. You have to be able to prepare for that future self as well that is unable to necessarily accomplish the task. You have to develop a framework, whether that's habituality, so you're talking about enforcing behaviors, so that even when you're not 100% you, or you're feeling bad or whatever, you're feeling weak, you want to cheat on whatever this rule is, you want to enforce the behavior so much that you won't even cheat because it becomes habitual to fulfill it, or have a framework in place, like I was saying, whether that's the way in which you are organising yourself towards the goal, or having a very detailed understanding of where you need to be going next, so that future self can communicate with that past self and go, oh, hang on, he said I need to make sure I don't do this, or make sure I need to adhere to this.
I think a large part of that kind of controlling those steps is to, there's the whole self-control element, but I think it's also important, and the Stoics did this as well. They kept diaries and stuff, but they also would work on these kinds of projects together, which is why you have things like Weight Watchers at the moment. You have these communal groups so they can remind each other and do because the more attentiveness you're putting into a practice, the more likely you are to do it. The more attentive you are to progress, and the more the less likely you are to consistently fail. It's not, again, that's this weird myth that I think we need to dispel, is failing is fine. It's about failing less and less. That is the point of a resolution. We have a saying in boxing, which is you don't lose, you only win or you learn. And I think it's quite a poignant phrase, to be honest, because it totally changes the way that you look at what you would previously have interpreted as a failure. So, for instance, I think one of the most common New Year's resolutions you'll hear, particularly for women, and I hate to generalize, but just from most of the women I talk to, the New Year's resolutions do tend to be around weight loss. That seems to be one that I hear a lot. Even in my own family, I hear that. And I think when you're talking with people like that, it's important that you reiterate to them, okay, well, you're not going to succeed straight away. You need to, first of all, like Nye said, prepare them for every eventuality. And I think if you unpack that kind of thing, people then start to get scared because they're like, oh, well, I just thought I'd just go to the gym or something. And suddenly they realize that to actually do it, they've got to look up numbers of PT. They've got to get a friend to go with them because they've got anxiety about being at the gym. They've got to get a diet plan. They've got to find a calorie counter. Yeah. And as the list goes on and on and on, that's a real test of whether someone really wants it or not. And I think, like Nye said, more people need to actually be aware of when they are going to set out to do something like that. They need to know what it's going to entail. They need to really want it, so it has to be meaningful. And they need to make sure that they're in a position where they're not setting themselves up to fail, because if they do that, they're just going to knock their confidence. They're not going to want to do it again.
Yeah, we live in a time, unfortunately, of a very fickle time of results. Instant results are imperative, whether that's someone's favourite football manager losing 6 matches in a row and getting sacked, or someone not obtaining the correct grades that they wanted the first time for school, and then therefore being seen as an instant failure compared to their peers. And people are just kind of scared of failure in that way. And it kind of detracts them, really, and it's a bit of a shame because people tend to overlook because of that. No one ever sits down and discusses with anyone generally, the the philosophy of what why they're doing it, what they're doing, why they're trying to set these tangible goals and how they're going to achieve them. Like they said, within these frameworks, it's just about results.
Yeah, so Stoics were really big on the idea that we can only control how we sort of internalize things happening to us. So, someone punches you in the face, they'd say, oh, well, you couldn't control that. Why are you annoyed about it? What you can control is how you react to it. So taking that on board with resolutions, it's probably a better idea. Well, for a start, you should probably not be making resolutions on New Year's Eve night. Probably don't do that.
You had 10 points already.
Yeah.
That's that impulsivity we talked about already, isn't it? It's about planning it.
And probably not even in December, It should be something you've been contemplating for a very long time. December's a busy period. Like, you want to be thinking about this properly and think about whether it's external factors at play. So it's like the goal is to make more money. All right, well, that's, at least for a Stoic, and I think I would agree with them. It's a particularly hard one, that is, making more money, because it relies on all these external variables.
And it's also a very vague goal. It's not very useful to say, just be a better person or just earn more money.
Precisely.
Or, specificity.
What does that mean? Yeah. You need to drill down and you need to give yourself a better chance of succeeding, because if you're vague, the criteria is vague and you're never going to measure up to it. If it's like, I aim to be a better person, you may have made a couple of changes towards that. And if you've been a bit more specific, you might have actually come away with a sense of achievement. But if you just look at it like, well, I'm not a better person, even though if you really, really analyse it underneath the microscope, they actually had done a couple of really good things, but then they give up after a week. So I think being specific and taking the time to plan it out is seriously important. I think picking something that's meaningful as well, something that you actually really, really want, and not something that's just going to look trendy to your mates.
Well, something that you need, I think, will be such a big drive for it, and just have that process of thinking about, well, what do I need? Why am I making this resolution? Is this something I need? So like properly thinking about what that will do for you and how hard that will be to do it, and whether it's worth that. So weight loss, well, you can't. This is why it's really bad. You can't have umbrella resolutions. Like, be a better person. Well, what does that mean? In what sense? Pick an area, because otherwise it's going to be really, really difficult for you. So weight loss, you've got to, how are you going to lose weight? Because there's only what, 2 or 3 ways you can actually lose weight: eat less, run, or have an operation.
Well, it's to sort of either increase the output or decrease the input.
Right. And then it's like,
ideally both.
And it's like, so how, it's going to be really hard. How have you got measures in place to cope with that? Because obviously if it wasn't hard, you'd be doing it already. So what are you going to do differently?
Thanks for mentioning things like Weight Watchers, but also generally, Kieran, you mentioned sort of groups and sort of fear of failure from peers as such as well. I'd be interested to see if there was some kind of, quantitative research and data that showed a positive correlation between how many people there are in a group compared to an individual, and then the percentage chance of success of a resolution. Because I not based on anything quantitative here, but I reckon, because we are naturally supposed to be social animals, that in a group you'd probably be more likely to achieve those goals, kind of at least short-term goals more consistently, I think. Anyway,
I have no data.
As research.
I have no data to back that up, but from my personal experience, talking to people I know that go to group exercise classes, group like Weight Watchers and so forth, I personally think that Weight Watchers is a nonsense. I don't like a lot of the teachings that they offer, but the fact that they're offering a group where people who are probably quite insecure about their bodies can go along and they can all be there to motivate each other. They don't feel like they're under scrutiny from what they deem to be a big nasty world full of people looking at them. Absolutely, I think.
What's your beef with Weight Watchers?
There's a lot of nonsenses in it. I think the sin-free foods, Weight Watchers are the ones that do the sin-free. They offer, or it was that weight slimming world
nutrition.
There's the meal replacement shakes and so forth. There's a lot of pseudoscience that comes along with their idea of nutrition. Ultimately, I teach people 2 things. I work for a healthcare company. That you can lose weight whilst eating unhealthily, and you can gain weight whilst eating healthily. Weight loss and eating healthily are 2 completely different things. Ideally, you want both. I could eat 700 calories at McDonald's a day, and you could eat 3,500 calories of organic salads every day. I'd be the one that loses weight. every time. I'd also be the one that gained type 2 diabetes and died of a fucking heart attack. But that's a separate point. So, but no, I've kind of gone off the rails here a bit. But no, I agree with you. I think having a group, having people that can be there to motivate you, and I know we keep focusing
on the main thing is accountability, right?
Yeah,
I think that's one of the because I've sort of talked. One side of the coin, as we mentioned earlier, is this idea of you get that dopamine hit from sharing too much. But on this other side of the coin is like if there is a degree of accountability in something, that can be a powerful motivator. If I'm going to be embarrassed, or am I going to be
a group? Like, if I'm going to be ejected 2 stone this week,
if I'm going to be held accountable for not actually accomplishing my goals, and that's an important part of it, which often isn't in the resolutions. Is there's no accountability.
Yeah, this is the last time I mentioned the Stoics because I fucking banged on about them, but that was kind of the crux of where they were coming from in how they made resolutions. So, like we are, most of us today, they were materialists. So that kind of meant lots of different things, namely that there wasn't a God, there wasn't any kind of providence that would kind of solve their problems for them. So it's this kind of self-ownership of reality. That was like the big thing. Also, there was no afterlife. So it was all about making the most of what they had.
Yeah, I think prioritizing as well is like seriously good. I mean, one of the things that I got taught this year was the Serenity Prayer. I don't know if any of you know it. I can't remember the exact wording, but it's basically it's religiously worded. It's grant me God the strength to accept the things I cannot change, and the basically saying there's stuff in life that you can't change and there's stuff in life that you can change. Focus on that. So I think that's another thing to keep in mind is if you're setting yourself something, and I did allude to this earlier, but just to reiterate for anyone that's listening that's actually taken advice from this group of numpties, don't set yourself up to fail. Don't set something that is not actually going to work, because all that's going to do is going to knock your confidence. You're going to be less likely to do more goal setting, because what a New Year's resolution, when done effectively, should do, it shouldn't set you up to wait until January the 1st of the next year to put the next one in place. You should get the ball rolling, and by, I don't know, February, March, whatever it is, the timescale may vary dependent on what you've actually chosen to do. You should be like, yeah, do you know what? Fuck, I'm smashing this. I'm going to do something else now. I'm going to keep the momentum going. I fixed that in my life. I've become, specifics about being a better person. I'm less argumentative now. How about I fix that? And it gets you into that sort of forward moving momentum of positivity. And that's what people need. So I think the first thing is be realistic with yourself. If I say I'm going to become a 6'8" jacked basketball player, obviously, and it's a silly example, but I'm setting myself up to fail. But if I set myself something realistic, something achievable, something that is going to challenge me,
and has all the very specific steps to achieve that
precisely.
Yes, exactly.
And again, I think if anyone's going to take stuff away from this, is just be prepared and don't set out to do something on a whim. Think about it. Why am I doing this? Why do I want to do this? What is this going to do for me? And how the fuck am I going to do it? And if you can tick all those boxes off and square all that away, and you've got a plan in place, then, my friend, you've got a good New Year's resolution.
I think, especially momentum with kind of setting new goals is a very important thing, because a lot of people have that mindset of perfectionism is an all or nothing approach.
Yeah.
So conversely, you have people that will achieve numerous goals, and some people that kind of stuck in gear one because they're kind of already envisaging their own failure because something might not have materialized perfectly in the way they wanted.
What I was saying earlier about the whole idea that probably should be a cultural framework and to underpin a lot of this stuff. Are you smiling at me?
No, I just burped really obnoxiously while you were talking.
Thank you.
Also, apologies for this really squeaky chair. I'm really uncomfortable.
Mate, squeaky chairs are our thing.
It's so obnoxious.
So what I was saying to you earlier about the cultural framework underpinning this, I think that would kind of help, because I going to kind of go out on a limb a little bit and say that I think that the making of resolutions and the celebrating of New Year's Eve should probably be a bigger cultural institution than it is. It shouldn't be as hollow and as bland as it currently is. Mm-hmm. And I think it would be nice to almost frame it as a spiritual practice and something that everybody more or less takes seriously communally.
Yeah. I like the idea of it just being a reflective cultural practice. The idea of, as we've been laying out about resolutions, I think the problem with those is those are much more difficult, much more specific. require much more planning, etc. And that's why I don't think it necessarily works as a cultural holiday to say use resolutions or whatever. I'm going to be a new me. I think that's just sort of this weird arbitrary thing that's being tacked on that I think needs an entire framework of its own. But I like the idea of self-reflection, of reflection of what's been going on, of what's sort of like what we've lost and what we've gained during the year. I think there's nothing wrong with having that as an actual festival.
Yeah, but do you think that's what it's currently doing?
I think it's definitely doing that, yes. I think that there's obviously, like you said, there's lots of this tacked on stuff, and I think New Year's resolution is definitely one of those things.
I think New Year's, I think that's like a symptom of a greater problem, though, because you could say the same about Christmas. You could say about most of the festivals we have, they have all become, to some extent, a sort of sham, really. Like Easter's like it. Easter's more about chocolate than the circle of life and reincarnation or whatever it's set out to be initially.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, we did a Halloween podcast.
reincarnation.
And like, in our Halloween podcast, we're talking about how Halloween is just so heavily commercialized now, and it's
all
totally
Day,
devoid.
right?
Do you guys want some history on New Year's?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Right. I gotta find some
Hard facts here.
Yes.
So obviously, yeah, there have been loads and loads of different like ancient examples of people marking the year or whatever. But the idea of the resolution actually ties in with that a lot. The Babylonians used to make offerings to God. The Romans, what's the god of luck in ancient Rome? Janus with the two heads, I think.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
So they would make offerings to usually a god associated with luck. It's kind of a motif throughout the ancient world, which I think is kind of interesting. But
Although where New Year actually started has very much varied over the ages, depending on which calendar you're
right, mate,
using.
I don't understand the Gregorian calendar and the Julian calendar.
Right.
Explain.
Do you want to go down that rabbit hole?
I do.
Let's go down the calendar rabbit hole.
Let's mic drop at 1580s.
Okay, let's condense it.
No, do some 1580 shit here. That's what we
All right,
need.
so let's get out some dates, because I actually have some dates that I wrote down.
Well, while you do that, I was just going to say the last example, right? Middle Ages, knights would do this kind of chivalric thing where they would, after Christmas, they would make something called a peacock vow.
Yeah.
Which is basically like a reiteration of their commitment to be chivalric.
Yeah.
There's a lot about luck, and so I know in Chinese culture, in the Chinese New Year, it's traditional for elders to give their kids like not a £1 note, but you know what I'm on about, like some money as a symbol of luck, mate. And they still give the little dangly charms, which is like a coin with the red tassels on it, and it's seen as luck. But there is a lot of emphasis on kind of luck and wishing you well for the new year coming forward. So it's a really symbolic sort of passing of the torch from this year's out the way, let's hope this one's a good one. It is something that everyone looks forward at.
And that's what I mean. So in wider Britain, we don't really have any of those kind of ritualistic things to tie in with this. We just go to the pub, get wrecked, and then...
Stonehenge, mate. Stonehenge.
Yeah, so...
We're not playing fucking Stonehenge.
So the Welsh and Scottish, they have much more specific thing. I'll get onto those later. Nye, do you have that Gregorian calendar?
You want to talk about... Okay,
I do,
I think maybe one way to do this is talk about it sort of from present day backwards. It might be an easier way to talk about calendars, but calendars are like one of these things that very quickly get very complicated and crazy. So like the Gregorian calendar, for example, the current one we're using, it was from 1582. That was Pope Gregory the 13th. And he essentially, a lot of the reason why calendars were adjusted, especially historically, was actually for religious reasons, because Easter would drift a lot. And so they noticed that Easter was drifting depending on where their definition of where Easter was landing. And this was quite embarrassing for the Catholic Church. So multiple times the calendars were adjusted to try and make sure Easter was on the same day. But obviously the problem is that the year is, it's like 365 point, and there's like lots of...
quarter of a day.
Yeah, you've got like a lot of digits after that. So you have this problem where like, okay, how are we going to actually resolve this in terms of just physical days? And the Gregorian calendar has a lot of good adjustments. I think it's once every 3,000 years, I want to say, it goes out by about a day. So it has about an accuracy, the current calendar we're on has about an accuracy of sort of one day of every 3,000 years, it's going to go a bit skewy. That's because the year is kind of this weird, slightly longer than 365 days. And obviously the way we currently also talk about time, so you might have heard of UTC, Universal Coordinated Time. So this is the way the Universal Coordinated Time is actually is done is we have multiple nuclear clocks in different places, and it's the average of those nuclear clocks, and that's how we get Universal Coordinated Time. But that also has to be adjusted in terms of you have to occasionally you have a leap second and things in UTC even, because UTC is also comparing itself to other sort of readings based on stuff like quasars and things like this. We're looking at like the frequency of certain things and the positions of certain things in astronomy, and we're also sort of adjusting it to that. So unfortunately, you also have relativity, which makes things even more complicated, because you have, for example, the core of the Earth is about 2.5 years younger than the surface of the Earth due to time dilation. So you have this weird. So since the Earth formed, obviously things in a lower gravitational state, the clocks move faster. This is obviously such a subtle effect that you end up with like all sorts of crazy stuff. So one crazy example is a dam in China increases the length of the day by about 0.06 microseconds.
Wow. Is that like from the tidal
Yes,
effect?
so because this amount of water is collected in one place, that has an effect on the angular momentum of the Earth. And so if you're taking angular momentum out of the turn of the Earth, that actually changes the length of the day, which is quite interesting. And I think let's find the actual stats so I don't forget this, but the current day is actually 1.7 milliseconds longer than it was 100 years ago. And every 100 million years, you gain about an hour on the day. I know in the Precambrian period, the day was about 21 hours long. I think it was 21 hours. So you can get this idea that like the way we're defining days and years and all that things is gets difficult. And to go back to the Gregorian calendar, again, we have this problem where not only are things sort of slightly shifting over massive timescales, but you also have this problem with the fraction at which of days that you also have added onto the tropical year. But there's also other ways to define a year. So we actually use a tropical year, which is to do with seasons. That's what it's about. It's about, okay, when is the orbit of the Earth in such a way that we have the axial tilt and all this sort of thing giving us the seasons. And that's the way we want to define it. But there's also what's called a sidereal year, which is also when we look at the stars. So we're looking at the positions of things in the sky and going, oh, when do these sort of return to the same sort of places they are? And that's also another way to define
when is north, magnetic north, true north? It's kind of, so many variables.
But even before the Gregorian calendar, we had stuff like the Julian calendar.
It was just a Gregorian, which is a revised version, like an upgraded version of the Julian calendar.
Yes,
wasn't it?
yeah, it was. Right, so yeah. Julius Caesar was I don't know if it was one of him himself or whether it was someone you never know. I haven't digged into the history of this, but
boy, he had a calendar named after him. He's a modest guy, and he talks in the third person.
Yeah, exactly.
What a dude.
But before that it was the Julius calendar, the Julian calendar, and that's actually where we get the name June from. Is from Julius Caesar.
Where do we get Augcember from?
Augcember we made up.
Well, August actually comes from Augustus.
Which, yeah, I know.
So actually, a lot of the months are actually named after.
May was Maya or something.
And originally there were 10 months. There's still an error carried forward when you didn't have January and February. So Sept 7, Oct 8 should be the 7th and 8th months of the year respectively, whereas actually they are 9th, 10th, 11th, and so on. Right. So that was the addition of January and February, and that's when it just gets really fucking complicated.
Because Romans loved putting things in tens. So we actually used to have, I think the Julian calendar, it might be the Julian calendar, it might be earlier. It probably was earlier. It had 10 months. So this is the problem. You also have like a lot of the names being carried on for the months. That's why you have like October on the 10th of the month, even though because we used to have like 10 months. So October would have actually been the 8th. So you have all these like weird historical things where things are carried on to like the next version of the calendar that's trying to adjust for Easter, flying around the place and going like, wait, hang on, this isn't Easter. And so, calendars have been revised over and over again over the years. I mean, like most of our current conceptions of the calendar actually do come from Roman influence, and that's like most of where sort of the things really started were trying to be organized. That's why you hear about the Julian calendar and our current calendar. But and before that it was just absolute mess. Like, you wouldn't believe what they
Babylonian
were-
calendar.
It was poor trial and error.
Well, the Babylonians are responsible for the names of our weekdays and things like this. I mean, especially in other languages, but in English we have a lot of like Norse influence, where a lot of words got replaced for Norse gods later on. But stuff like Monday, for example, comes from Mars, because the actual days of the week came from planets. Because the Babylonians had a sort of cyclical thing going on where they divided the hours of the day. So 24 hours in a day, they divided those hours to be named after one of the planets. And at that time, there were 7 planets that were known. And so they named every hour of the day, and this cycle would repeat. So it'd be like the 7 planets, and then next 7 hours, you have the next 7 planets. Sort of, and obviously, 7 doesn't go into 24 neatly. So what you'd end up with every day, the hour would start with a new planet. And so that day would be called after that particular planet. And so that's where the weeks came from, because if you keep that going, you realize that it cycles back on itself after a week. So that's where you get a lot of the weekdays, and then obviously you can see
you got your 52 weeks in the year.
Yeah, and in French it's sort of more obvious. You can see more of the like where that root is a lot better. But in English, obviously, we some of the weekdays also got sort of replaced with Norse gods and things like this, and because of that influence. But yeah, so the calendars are mental.
French.
But
Is it Lundi?
Lundi,
Mardi, Mercredi. So that is actually Mercury, Venus, in that order.
Yeah,
Vendredi,
yeah. Yes.
Jeudi,
Mind
Jupiter,
blown.
I'm assuming.
Our listeners can't see my face right now, but I have the face of a man that has just been thoroughly red pilled. I'm talking like a whole tub of red pills forced down my throat.
I quite like this.
Mr.
Us
Anderson.
3 just sitting listening tonight. It's like autistic Sesame Street.
There's so many things to learn, mate. It's so good.
yeah, I mean, obviously before that they were measuring time. So, like, for example, the first sundial, I believe, was about was sort of ancient Egypt. So,
I thought I invented that in my back garden. But stick in the ground.
yeah, calendars were interesting because at first they were obviously to mark the seasons and try to get that. And then what's interesting is a lot of what helped us specify calendars, and the reason why stuff like the Julian calendar and later the Gregorian calendar became formalized, as I mentioned, is because of Christianity, because they wanted to make sure that Easter was on the same day, and they're like, well, why the hell is this drifting this far away? And it was embarrassing. So they were like, oh, we need to introduce leap years. And obviously now we have leap seconds in UTC and things, but we still technically use the Gregorian calendar, which does drift. But yeah, timekeeping now is absolutely mental. And like I said, is that we have to use atomic clocks. We have to allow for the rotation of the Earth is like a big point, because the rotation of the Earth is slowing is like gradually slowing as well. Wow. So we have all these problems. So one is tidal forces. So, for example, the moon and the Earth, there are tidal forces going on gravitationally, and the moon is actually slowly sort of drifting out very slightly, and it's sort of that process is slowing the rotation of the
slowing
Earth.
it down as well.
Yeah, so we have this other interest. So there's multiple reasons why, the Earth's rotation is slowing, and like I said, there's the days were much shorter. Precambrian days were about 20 hours long, 21 hours long, something like that. So you have this like weird thing where, yes, days are getting longer because the rotation of the Earth is slowing and all these sorts of things. So we have all these problems with actually trying to figure out, okay, how are we actually going to measure a year going forwards? And I believe there hasn't been any proposed adjustments to the Gregorian calendar yet. I think something like 2023 they were going to decide on whether they wanted to.
So by definition then, even with the advancements, is there never really going to be a completed model? Is it only just kind of improving? Is it kind of like you can't converge on zero? Is it kind of like that?
It depends on your definition. So this is the problem, is like it's more about the definition than it is about the actual problem, because time is relative. This is the problem we have. We have to measure it on something. We have to decide on a certain definition.
There has to be some template.
And atomic clocks are decided on to do with the frequency of a cesium atom. So if that's if we're defining the second, I believe the second is defined metrically in terms of cesium atoms. So if we're defining it that way, then we can build a definition of how that time passes. But the definition of a year is weird, because the definition of a year is that where the Earth does one complete orbit of the sun? Is it where it's at the same position it was in the sky? Is it to do with seasons? Is it to do with axis?
Yeah.
So we have all these problems where we have to be defining a year based on sort of what we want. And whereas a second, we can kind of come up with a pretty good, although again, because of relativity, we have to be quite careful of whether we're saying this is an absolute measure of time. But yeah, we have to pick a definition. So there's always going to be specificity, which is an issue. But of course, the Gregorian calendar, like I said, I think once every 3,000 years, about a day, we're going to lose. Unless we adjust it. So eventually it probably will get adjusted because we'll need more and more accurate time. But like I said, UTC at the moment is the best we have because, again, that's to do with atomic clocks and things. But that's not actually to do with the calendar. That's more just to do with the number of seconds that have passed since about 1970 when UTC, I mean, you might see on computers when a file is totally
I was trying to think whether I've actually seen that written down for UTC.
You'll sometimes see 1970 as this like when your file is like reset, and that's because that's when Universal Coordinated Time is technically started. So you have everything sort of started in 1970 as far as digital files are concerned, then everything's counting a certain number past 1970.
That's so cool. I think other people might not think that's cool. I think it's cool.
I think, yeah, I do.
I think it's really cool.
Fucking hope so, because I was talking for like 20 minutes.
Okay,
about
should
it.
we?
No, that was sick. I didn't know most of that. That's awesome.
Yeah, despite the like pretty arbitrary nature of how all the years worked out and everything, the idea of like having a marked point in the year where we reflect on the previous one just seems like, I mean, just as a bit of testimony to how fucking powerful this idea is. There are people in Times Square that celebrate it, and they're wearing like adult nappies.
Yeah,
just to stand there for ages.
It's a huge event. There.
Have you ever been to London and actually?
Yeah.
Not for
Been to London.
Yeah,
no, you mean the whole Big Ben?
You mean for New Year's?
Yes.
Man. Yeah, I was in New Year's. I was in New Year's. Christ. I was in London New Year's on 2018, and it was absolute bedlam. And I went to a rave at Printworks, which was really sick actually.
Nice.
I was the only sober person in the building. I didn't drink a drop of alcohol that night.
That must have been fun.
Oh no, it was great. The
You
music
were
was
the only
cracking.
person who was elliptically aware of what was going on. Everyone was just cutting some
was-
disgusting shapes on the floor.
I was dad dancing was out in full effect. But yeah, no, I think New Year's, I kind of touched on this earlier, but it has just become yet another excuse for debauchery.
Yeah, I tried. So I tried doing this back in sixth form, I think, or maybe uni first year. It was like quite a while ago now. So, went into the middle of London. Instantly regretted it. Yeah, it took like a couple of tubes together. But just absolutely, it's mental, and you can't really drink or anything. All the bars are just completely rammed, and we got there about a few hours early.
Yeah.
It was just one of the, we were obviously just fucking tourists, so it was the really stupid idea. We didn't know what was going on, and everything's just funneled into like little boxes, like ropes and step this way, sir, and everything, and it's just crazy. And I don't
Some
know
people
what the
thrive
point
in that
is.
environment. Some people relish it. Some people do not like it, and I'd probably fall into the latter. Not because I would say completely introverted as such, but I feel pressured to have a good time. I'm having to pay twice the amount for my drink. I have no room to breathe. It's very likely, statistically, be more involved in being punched in the face, for example. But just by the nature of there being more people out in a densely populated area as well.
There's too many variables introduced. You get so many people there. It's like, well, the chances of things happening are just like much more likely.
Yeah.
But are the chances of it happening to you less likely because there's more people?
Mic drop.
I want to backtrack a bit.
1580.
You've just touched on a really interesting point I completely forgot, and that is how people capitalize on the desperation of people to be involved in some sort of celebration on New Year's. So bars bump up their prices. They put out tickets for ticketed events way early, and they, when it comes to the last few waves of tickets, they're ridiculous prices.
What do people think they're going to miss? You know what I mean?
But this is it, and again, it comes back to this societal pressure of you have to be here, and if you miss this, you're a cunt. I went to.
Well, I think it's a bit. I think it's a bit. I don't know. It's a bit of a cop out to never do a New Year's ever. To be a complete recluse.
Try before
No,
you buy.
I agree, but I think people capitalise on it with with bad intentions. I went to Whitechapel Fried Chicken. Absolutely done though. Shout out.
We get paid now.
Yeah, food hygiene rating 3 stars now, I think. Come on, moving up in the world. I went there on New Year's. It was right next to my place, and I ate at this place regularly. It was literally my next door neighbour, just over the other entrance to the tube station, and they doubled their prices. I went in there, and I knew exactly how much meal number 3 costed, and I was like, "Excuse me, boss, why is this £8.50?" And he was like, "New Year's, buddy." And I remember thinking
less likely to question it
precisely,
if they're drunk.
Less likely to question it, and also who doesn't want to have fun on New Year's? Who doesn't want to go in with their mates and be a cheapskate on New Year's? Oh, it's New Year's. And it's just this crazy kind of pressure for all of the wrong reasons. And I think what we've touched upon in this podcast are the more meaningful aspects of New Year's that in an ideal world people would adopt and people would make that the focus. And it's just a shame it's turned into this big stampede of people that have to be at the place to be on New Year's, that have to be celebrating. If they don't, they're depressed. I know when I was younger, I had a New Year's in. I think I was like 19, 18 years old. I didn't do anything on New Year's, and I felt so shit about it. And looking back, it's like, why?
I used to.
Why did I feel shit about it?
Making me
Yeah.
depressed because like every New Year's.
Yeah,
Yeah, like so the last 2
but
New Years, I've
genuinely,
fallen asleep at 8 p.m. and I've just woken up the next day and thought, well, actually, that was quite a good night's sleep.
Well,
but previously, I probably would have disagreed with my stance.
Here's the thing. So that night in London, after that, I went to a bar in Camden. It took ages to get in. Got in there, and it was with my mate. I was just like, "What should we do? Should we be doing something right now?" Like and then people start counting. 10, 9,
Move's
8.
poking someone.
And we're just
Move, do something.
Yeah, move. And then there's this guy.
Text you.
Who we've been sat with, hasn't said a word because obviously there's limited seating, so he's just been sat there just staring into the abyss. And on the whole, hey, Happy New Year, and everyone's dancing, he stands up with his bottle, smashes it on the table.
Oh,
I'm just there in my old cheap like brown suit, just like covered in glass, just like what? And then he gets like fucking thrown out. He obviously wasn't having a good New Year. But just that was
God,
That's really depressing.
I know. That was
and some demons.
I thought you were going to say
he brought his
something.
demons into public life.
No, I thought this was going to be like this positive story of, we joined him at the table,
No,
we
I
celebrated together.
I thought I knew where it was going.
No.
I might have heard it before.
What I
Howard's
wanted
shattered
to
glass
say
to his
was,
throat.
so that was the social pressure. That was the bad one. I think the good one, the best one we had was much more contemplative, which is where we went to that old country pub. We did the pub quiz. Had a few drinks and then went back to our hometown and just chatted and didn't get too so I think that's what I'm going to be doing this year anyways.
Excuse me, Dungeons and Dragons New Year's just gone was fantastic.
Well, yeah, that one too.
We had Mr. Sam Lusted being the cultural appropriating, mildly racist and homophobic tree, which was an experience.
We had your gnome, which is called Chad.
Chad the gnome, yeah.
No, I spent the whole night rolling about on my computer chair. But do you know what I mean? That was quite a simple New Year's.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it was fantastic. But at the end of that night, if you remember rightly, we were desperately running around Cheltenham like a headless chicken, stressing because we couldn't get into a bar. We had to be part of it. No, we got to be in there. Where does that come from?
Yeah, well, I gave up. I just stood in the middle of town.
We did, and we stood by the fountain. And do you know what? I thought, fuck it. And I had Ashley with me, and I hate to be soppy, but that was all I needed, man. Like that was great. Like I just sat there, I just stood there and said Happy New Year to Ashley, and that was great. And I had you lot with me, and ultimately
FOMO, mate, fear of missing out. I mean, when you're actually a lot of the time in there in the moment, you kind of realize, well, actually, I got in there.
Yeah,
Now, what do I do now?
You're so busy trying to get
Someone just
into
spilled a
this
drink
place.
all over me. Great.
The place you perceive to be where you need to be is actually not, and it's usually right there in front of you. Like, I'm not being funny now. You've said you spend most of your New Year sat inside, not doing anything. Maybe that's what you like doing. Like, maybe that's just that's
so tragic, but it's kind of true.
But only because
definitely
other
what I like.
people would
Probably
say
what I
it's
like
tragic. But
doing.
if you're happy, then fuck it. Like, do you know what I mean? I think an important thing for people to do on New Year's is make sure that they're spending it with the right people, that they're not doing something just because it's what everyone else says that they
This
should
is why I
be
think
doing.
it's a really more spiritual thing, because you're combining, this looking at the past, taking stock, being reflective. You're thinking about the future as well in the making of resolutions and thinking, how am I going to make this year a better one, or how am I going to keep this up, or if it's been a good year previously. But then you've also got this whole present element as well. It's like all of time, thinking about all of time combined, and you're thinking about, you're enjoying the present a lot more than you would be if you're getting New Year's celebrations right. At least you're enjoying the present a lot more than you would be normally. You're just trying to have fun in the here and now.
Yeah, I think if I was going to kind of caveat what I just said is don't take what I'm saying as you can't go out and go to one of these big events that it's impossible to have fun. There are plenty of people out here that genuinely go out and they have a wonderful night. I'm just saying when you plan your New Year's celebrations, think carefully about who you're spending it with, where you're doing it, and why you're doing it, and what you're going to be doing. Don't spend
Sounds
all
like
night.
a public service announcement.
Seriously,
have a game plan.
don't spend all night chasing the fucking dragon, because before you know it, New Year's will whiz you by, and you've missed a night that we all have agreed is a good opportunity to have a profound sense of reflection, of projection, and of kind of experience in the here and now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. So happy numerical transition in the Gregorian calendar, everyone.
Yes.
Nye is single, ladies.
Have a good one.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, New Year's, I just kind of really do nothing. There's nothing, proactive or, negative I really do as such.
Come on, we actually can't have started that.
Okay, fucking disaster already.
Right, okay.
New Year's, right? No, no. Fuck. that wasn't even deliberate then.
Mate, I was just looking at the waveform on the Logic, and when you did that, it just went through the
That was
ceiling.
definitely like a 9 on the Richter scale there.
Technically, it's kind of like a timestamp though. So for Connor editing now, he can just edit it by when I scream in hilarity at his failed attempt to start the podcast. So you can use that as a edit point.
We can do chops.
Yeah. So guys, New Year's nearly here. What do you guys do for it?
Oh, fucking try that again. Try this again. Try use guys once, please.
Are you qualified for this? Who hired you?